So the climate crisis is accelerating, which means we're in increasingly unfamiliar territory. And that means that there's a growing need for specific insurance products that can cover climate-related risk. But many of those products are still in their infancy. So I'm joined today by Milena Nikolova from Behavior Smart, which is a member of the SOTERIA project consortium. And what SOTERIA is doing is working to document best practices, identify innovative solutions, and see how some of those climate insurance products could actually be taken to market. So thank you for joining me, Milena.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Right. All right. So my first question was, wanted to know, what are the main factors that are contributing to the current gap in climate-related insurance coverage across Europe? You know, why do we not have these products yet? And what is the SOTERIA project doing to address those gaps?
Thank you. Wonderful question. I do have to say that you will hear me talk about the behavioral and psychological factors that prevail in the situation which we have, because this is the lens that I am taking here as a behavioral scientist. From a behavioral point of view, one of the biggest challenges is that climate change and new climate realities are new to us. So until maybe a few years back, the big challenge with failure to act or to respond to the climate crisis was related to the fact that nothing visible was happening. So we were just talking, but it was intangible. So when people deal with intangible risks, they have a very hard time activating action, whether it's buying different insurance, or it's investing in solutions that mitigate or reduce risk. Today, unfortunately, we live in a world where the effects of climate change are becoming very visible, very tangible, and they're causing loss of life and material losses. That said, we still are early in the realization, and we haven't seen yet the massive change in behavior, including acting towards solutions that help us prepare for or reduce the risk through insurance services. So this is one of the main reasons that we are still seeing such a significant gap between people's understanding and recognition that climate change is here, and it's bringing significant risks both for individuals and businesses, and taking action, namely buying insurance that can protect us or at least help us recover faster after we have been exposed to insurance risk.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So how are you working with insurance providers? I mean, you say that people aren't buying the insurance, but I understand that a lot of the insurance products are not actually mature yet as well. So it's not even an option for people to take out the right insurance. So how are you working with insurance providers or public authorities or other climate stakeholders to sort of develop new solutions?
You're absolutely right that on one side we have the demand, the gap on the demand side, but there is also the fact that on the supply side we need faster transformation than it's happening, and that has a lot to do again with the recognition of new realities and then the responding to that, because very often this process of adapting both the supply and the demand side takes time for multiple reasons, not only for the behavioral and sociological that I mentioned, but also institutional policy and so on and so forth. Projects such as the SOTERIA project, which look to accelerate that process in order to close that gap, are really efforts with long-term impact. The idea of the project actually is to look at the entire ecosystem around insurance services, so to say, because the insurance business is highly dependent on regulation. It involves very close relationships with public authorities, with other businesses, and so on. And of course, with the potential buyers, who might be individuals, who might be businesses. So the idea of the SOTERIA project is to look at that entire ecosystem and then first conduct analysis of where are the gaps and why they exist. Which of them are legal, regulatory, which of them are behavioral and psychological, and which of them are associated with other factors. And then see what can we do to change design elements in that ecosystem so that we can close that gap. So some of the areas we're looking at is just as you pointed out, the fact that insurance products are not fully aligned with the new realities and do not really cover in an adequate manner the new risks which climate change brings to individuals, to farmers, to businesses. So some of the work is focused on how can we change that. Other areas, for example, relate to the perceptions and ability to understand risk so that that's enough motivation to act, to invest in insurance products. So this is where we're looking at how can we communicate insurance better. This is where the behavioral sciences component comes in, because we are looking at what does research know about the mechanisms that activate people's intention to take precautions and then to actually take action as a result of that. How do they measure the size, the cost of the investment they need to make versus the potential risk that the future might hold for them. So we look at how can we communicate better, how can we influence the perceptions of the insurance buyers so that they can actually take the right steps and reduce the risk as much as possible. And then, of course, we're also looking at policies and regulations. The reality is that in some cases, a quick solution to insurance gaps is regulation and requiring that businesses or individuals buy certain type of insurance, which we are actually starting to see in some countries across Europe.
All right, it sounds like there's an awful lot of data gathering that needs to happen.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me a little bit more about those products? I mean, I know part of the SOTERIA project is actually sort of helping to develop some of those products. Like, can you share any insights into what's already out there, what's emerging?
So we are at the stage where we are now, we've collected a lot of data, and actually you touched on data, and this is probably one of the most interesting challenges in the space in which the SOTERIA project works, because climate risks cannot be assessed and evaluated and understood in full unless everybody in one ecosystem collaborates and exchanges data. Now, this sounds like something that's natural and easy, especially when we are dealing with public institutions. But when you have a mix of public and private, including insurance businesses, for whom information and data is core to their competitiveness, then it becomes very difficult, because how is it that you are asking insurance companies to exchange and share data so that you have a comprehensive, complete picture of what are actually the risks within a certain area, if they perceive that this data is core to their business? So figuring out mechanisms in which we can enable that exchange in a way that everybody in the ecosystem, from the individual buyers to the insurance companies and the policy institutions, the public institutions, the infrastructure institutions, can access the information that gives them a full big picture of the situation, so that everybody can then make more reliable and relevant decisions. So this, for example, is one area which is so far resolved to some extent in Norway, where work on integrating data sources and looking at insurance data and mixing that with publicly available data in order to assess risks, climate risks in full, and then respectively respond. This is the only country which has made progress in integrating and solving that. So we are, for example, one area in which we are looking to innovate and reinvent is to look at, okay, how they have done it, what are the factors that actually have shifted the behaviors, the roles of the different players in the ecosystem, and how can we take these changes and then execute a similar process, design and execute a similar process that would enable to exchange of data in Gabrovo, which is one of the regions in Bulgaria which is participating, or in Valencia, which is another region which is participating, because each of them, from a socioeconomic institutional context, is very, very different. So the insurance business is different, the public sector dynamics are different. So how do you take the best practice that has worked somehow in Norway and then introduce it in other places, at least in order to be able to have a very realistic information and assessment of the risks, so that on the basis of that, we can then begin thinking, okay, how can we as a policymaker shift the way that we treat insurance, the way that we insure public assets, but also that we encourage private sector players to do that, or how we as an insurance business actually adjust the way that we talk about or present our climate risk insurance services in order to ensure that more people take them up. So this is one illustration of the types of innovations that we're looking at in order to really shift the whole ecosystem around climate-related insurance.
Mm-hmm. And as you were talking, I was thinking how incredibly difficult it must be gathering data on something that is a changing situation. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That too, because we know that we have seen that the climate is changing and that the weather patterns have shifted. And we know that this trend will continue in the future, and it will probably be even more dynamic than what we are seeing now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, incredibly challenging. So you mentioned your pilot regions, which I'm quite interested in knowing about. Obviously, as you've said, each region is different. Public sector is different. People's sort of take on things is different. Can you tell me a little bit more about the activities that are going on in your pilot regions and any of the findings that you've had? Like, I know, for example, you've already found that climate change is going to disproportionately affect those different regions. Certain regions will be more vulnerable to natural hazards than others. What other learnings are coming out of those pilot regions?
One of the things, so one of the first things that we did is that we tried to establish what are the main threats. In some cases, we're looking at a high risk of floods, different forms of flooding. In other cases, we're looking at wildfires. In other cases, we're looking at drought. In the different regions that are covered by the project, we're trying to focus on one or two of the biggest risks. not because the others don't matter, but because, as you pointed out, what we're trying to do is so complex that we need to pilot the innovation and the experimentation that is going on around one or two areas rather than start with many elements that will be up in the air at the same time. We are also focusing on different audiences, which is also important. For example, another experimental region is in Croatia, and there the focus is on farmers. So one of the things that I can say probably unifies the regions where we are seeing low uptake of insurance in general, is that there's, whether we are talking to farmers or we're talking to individual homeowners or we're talking to businesses, in the cases when they don't buy any insurance, much of the gap is due to what is the right word? Unrealistic perceptions or assessments of the risk. So it's a very human decision-making, psychological factors of being more hopeful or being unrealistic about the prospects of a negative versus positive effect, undermining the fact that the risk is actually present and maybe your neighbor or a farmer within your region has lost everything the previous or the year before the previous year, and so on and so forth. And so believing that it's not going to happen to me. So this is one thing. Another factor very often is mistrust in insurance companies. This is something that happens, and the discussion about where it comes from is probably lengthy and rich in itself. But from the point of view of the work that we are doing, our focus is on, okay, we know that this is there. How do we actually tackle that? How do we address the fact that sometimes farmers won't buy insurance simply because they don't trust that their money is going to give them a good return or a reasonable return in case of disaster. So very often we are looking at these behavioral factors, which is why part of the innovation in the design of the process that we are taking is to include behavioral science and to have that expertise in order to plug it in where it's needed.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you raise about lack of trust, because I think it can often seem like insurance companies don't want to insure us for anything they might actually have to pay out for. And I guess that could definitely hamper uptake. Apart from perceptions and the behavioral factors, what are the other factors that are sort of barriers to people adopting climate insurance or developing climate insurance for the providers? Perhaps social, economic. You mentioned regulations, that's perhaps one.
Yeah. Well, for sure, the regulatory frameworks in many countries or regions, when they have more freedom to influence that on regional level, still has to catch up with the contemporary realities. In some countries across Europe, governments are taking proactive measures and are trying to adapt their legislation, but in many places this is not the case. A very easy example is requiring insurance. In many other context, insurance is required. For example, car insurance, so for other types of protection, we have already matured the societies to understand that it must be a required thing because this is the beneficial for society. Obviously, if we leave it to the individual to decide, many people will be, and we know that from psychology and sociology, many people will focus on the fact that maybe they're trying to save or spend less or lower their family budget right now. So they will take an unreasonable risk for the future. And because we know that this is human realism that we all recognize, we have introduced in policies a requirement to take that insurance. So you can't go without one. I feel that one of the things that we will need to move on very soon is required insurance against climate risks. It might be that in different countries, it might be focused on the types of insurance that is on the types of risks that are relevant for the specific regions. But this is going to be inevitable in some cases because we need to make the shift very quickly from not thinking about or not recognizing the need for insurance that's related to climate change to actually having one. So this to me is one of the areas where we will see probably changes in policy and regulation. Now we also have to recognize the fact that insurance is a business. And as a business, it needs to it thinks through the prism of profits. And yes, it's a more regulated business than other economic sectors, but it still needs to run as a business. So reinventing the business and the offerings and the relationship between insurance companies and the market is probably going to also be part of what we're going to be seeing in the next years, because ultimately, if we are to have insurance in the marketplace and for it to work well, it needs to be a healthy market. Insurance companies need to be healthy as businesses. So in that sense, the focus, the new perspectives on how this can remain a profitable business, but at the same time provide the social service that is needed in socioeconomic context will require some changes. And so this will be one of the most interesting areas that we will certainly monitor in the next years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there any specific companies out there that are already leading the way by developing sort of innovative new products?
I can give you some examples after the interview, just to make sure that I don't get the.
That's fine. If you can't name names, that's absolutely no problem. I was just thinking if there was anything already publicly out there.
But there are some interesting products that are I mean the good examples that we see incorporate nudges or strengthen motivation for taking the right steps towards lowering risk. So what I mean is, for example, we are seeing insurance service providers who provide insurance products that allow homeowners or business owners to recover after a natural disaster. But they actually, as a condition in the recovery, they require or incentivize them to rebuild and recover and refurbish after damage with materials which are more resistant, more sustainable, and which are more relevant to the contemporary weather conditions. So this, for example, is a great illustration of the type of thinking that we want to see, and that we also are looking at as an approach in order to move towards these realities where, again, business is business, and the insurance business is gaining the revenues that they are. Their clients are then protected and receiving sufficient protection, but also high quality service that then reduces risks in the future, and so on. So this is a good example of the type of innovations that we are starting to see here and there, and that also we are looking at as an approach.
Yeah, that's great. That's really encouraging to hear. And I think there's an increase in emphasis on, for example, obviously it's home ownership that comes to my mind, being a homeowner. I guess we could foresee a situation in the future where perhaps new builds would be able to get better premiums for being built with climate resilient materials, for example. So there's a role for the insurance sector in really driving that kind of change, isn't there?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, all right. So you've talked a lot about behavioral change. Obviously, that is the focus of Behavior Smart. I think before we spoke, I wouldn't have expected somebody who's a behavioral scientist to be so involved in insurance. But since you've been talking, I can completely understand why. So can you tell me a little bit more about the expertise and the resources that Behavior Smart is bringing to this project?
Absolutely. So Behavior Smart is focused on translating what behavioral science continues to accumulate as new knowledge about how people think, respond to situations, and act. And we take that and translate it into solutions that improve climate action, sustainability, well-being. One of the interesting aspects of wearing the glasses of a behavioral scientist is that we know that actually many challenges in the contemporary society, from the well-being crisis and happiness crisis to sustainability and climate, are due to unrealistic assumptions about how people make decisions and how they treat certain situations that are at the core of business solutions, policies, social services, and so on. So we, as behavioral scientists, in the context of this specific project, are trying to look exactly at the reasons why current behaviors are happening, to understand what are the triggers that steer people towards, for example, not buying insurance, or buying insurance with less protection. And then thinking about what are the factors that can move people from doing what we know is incorrect and actually risky for them, to making a decision or adopting a behavior which is better for them. It also happens to be better for society, because if everybody takes actions to reduce the risk, then entire societal ecosystems will be healthier and more protected. So we think about, okay, if we know that people just misperceive or underestimate the risk, what can we do with how we present information so that we can actually bring them closer to understanding what's the real size of the risk, so that when they're looking at the money they need to put down right now to buy insurance, what is what are they comparing this to, and how much, if they're thinking through financial terms, how much can you estimate, can you assign as an amount to the risk that might be there in front of you? So in these cases, we are trying to to think through the established and well-known psychological mechanisms that we know steer people in the riskier direction, and finding ways to actually bring them closer to what would be an ideal behavior. We might never get to 100%, but we still try to bring them as close as possible.
All right, that's fascinating. Okay, so those were all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you want to add about the topic of climate-related insurance? Any major insights that we haven't covered yet?
No, not really. This was interesting. I will give you some examples of solutions with the right company names to make sure that they're recognized properly. But the major thing from our perspective is just to recognize the fact that climate risks are very intangible, and this leads people from the individual to the farmer to actually the CEOs of big companies with significant assets to make unrealistic and wrongful decisions, which then put significant losses, which make significant losses, loss of life as well, much likelier. So this is why what we're trying to do here is really so important and so relevant to the fact that changes are happening faster than institutions and even businesses can change. So with projects like that, that accelerated the reprogramming of the ecosystem to the new realities is really something that is unique. And I have to say is very, very unique to the fact that in Europe, with the European Union and the mechanisms that fund projects such as SOTERIA are possible. I really think that this is something that needs to be widely recognized.
Well, it sounds like thanks to the work that you're doing, it's well on its way to getting there. So, all right, thank you. Very fascinating conversation. Milena Nikolova from Behavior Smart and the SOTERIA project. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.